disappointed in this decision. While the lack of diplomatic clearance for the Oliver Henry was regrettable, however, the United States is pleased that the U.S. Navy ship Mercy, it's a hospital ship, received diplomatic clearance and was able to take port in the Solomons Islands on the 29th. So that's today, isn't it? Yeah. And she'll be there to begin a 2-week humanitarian mission along with personnel from Australia and Japan. So we're glad to see that. I know that our State Department colleagues are in contact with the government there in the Solomons Islands. And we certainly expect that future clearances are going to be provided to U.S. ships. I refer you more to the State Department and Coast Guard for any more details on this, Rio. And certainly the government of Solomons Island should be the ones to speak to the reasons why they refuse that diplomatic clearance. Broadly speaking, I mean, we have seen, and I'm not talking about this incident or the Solomon Islands in particular, but clearly we've seen the Chinese try to bully and coerce nations throughout the Indo-Pacific to do their bidding and to serve what they believe their selfish national security interests are, rather than the broader interests of a free and open Indo-Pacific. It's regrettable. We call it out when we see it. But again, I'll let the government of the Solomon Islands speak for their decision making.
Let's go to Anita Powell from Voice of America. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, John. I've got a quick question on Afghanistan and then also on China. Firstly, in Afghanistan, we're hearing from individuals in the SIV process that it's too lengthy, complex, and that new applicants are routed through the same funnel as applicants whose applications are further along. So I was just wondering, a year after the withdrawal, what is the administration doing to further these applications and get these people out of, ostensibly danger? And then on China, recently, the Chinese military sent drones over a remote Taiwanese island. I just wanted to get the White House's response to, how the administration might react to that, and whether you think that this is incendiary and increasing the temperature. Thanks.
I can't confirm reports about them flying drones over Taiwan islands. We have seen since just before and certainly during and then since Speaker Pelosi's visit, the Chinese continuing to try to basically set a new normal here for activity, overflying the median line, sailing over the median line and staying over on the other side at longer periods of time, naval exercises around Taiwan. I mean, they're trying to turn up the temperature to a degree where it becomes sort of this new normal. We've said publicly we're not going to accept it. So again, I can't speak to this particular report. I have not seen that. But if it's true, it would appear to be in keeping with this effort by the PRC to, again, establish sort of a new normal of their assertive activity. We're not going to accept whatever new normal the Chinese want to put in place. Nothing's changed, as we've said, about our adherence to the one China policy. Nothing's changed about the fact that we do not support Taiwan independence. And frankly, nothing's changed about the fact that we're going to continue to do what we can in accordance with the law to help Taiwan defend itself, as well as to defend our own national security interests in the region. You saw over the weekend 2 Navy cruisers conducting a Taiwan Strait transit in international waters. We're going to continue to abide by international law. We certainly urge the Chinese to do the same. Now, on your question about SIV processing, I'll give you some top points, but I really would refer you more to the State Department to speak to the details. I mean, this is a program that they run, and I don't want to intrude on their equities, but since the president took office, he has undertaken substantial efforts to try to improve the SIV program, to make it more efficient, and to process applications more quickly. And in fact, he signed an executive order, I think back in February of 2021, that requires agencies to surge resources and streamline that application process. there was a review that we conducted to review every stage of this multiple step application process, the fairly cumbersome process that you talked about in your question, and to try to see if we could streamline that. That led to state and Homeland Security eliminating a whole 19-page duplicative form to simplify again the process. We expect that just that alone could help reduce the timeline by several months for many of these applicants. And as a result of all this effort, the State Department's issued more than 15,000 SIVs to principal applicants and their family members, and that's just since the start of the administration. Again, the State Department is continuing to look for ways to make the process better. They're continuing to actively process applications every single day, and of course, we're working as always to try to make it better. So again, we understand the frustration by many. Quite frankly, we share that frustration, and we're trying as hard as we can to streamline the process.
All right, thank you. Let's go to David Sanger from the New York Times. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks, John. A quick question back on the nuclear power plant that you were discussing at the beginning. Does the U.S. have any clarity on whether all of the shells that are falling around the plant are in fact from Russia, or whether we believe some may be shot off by the Ukrainians? And second, tell us a little bit about how you analyze Putin's strategy in taking the plant hostage. Is he essentially trying to get many of the benefits of threatening a nuclear weapon by threatening a disaster at the power plant? Or do you see this as a fundamentally different from what he was doing earlier in the war, when he was explicitly threatening that he might have to use nuclear weapons?
Those are great questions, David. On the shells, we don't have a way of counting shells or accounting for the artillery fire in and around the plant. We've been very clear publicly, quite frankly privately, that the fighting around the plant should stop, period. We do know, while we can't count shells for you, we do know that Russia has essentially militarized the power plant by stationing forces there, including weapons. And so we know that they are firing from around the plant. But exactly, what the exchange is on any given day, it would be impossible for us to know that. We've, again, been clear that the fighting around the plant should stop. A nuclear power plant is no place to be in the vicinity of combat operations. On your second question, to answer it completely accurately would require knowing exactly what Mr. Putin has in mind, and that's difficult for us to ascertain on any day, particularly on any issue with respect to Ukraine. But, I mean, we can piece together some things based on their activities and their actions. At the very least, we ascertain that by holding that plant, he can hold Ukraine hostage with respect to their own electrical power capability. He can, I mean, as you know, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant basically controls all the electrical power for much of southern Ukraine and even beyond. And so he can hold that power hostage. He could also he could actually potentially use some of that power to transport, or to be able to use that power inside Russia if he wanted to. So he could benefit from it inside Russia as well. And again, it is essentially in keeping with his broader overall strategic outcomes, which we do not ascertain have changed, which is to, in fact, take away Ukraine's sovereignty, replace their government, their democratically elected government, with one to his liking. I mean, even though the fighting is in Donbass in the south, we have enough ample information and public statements by the Kremlin to ascertain that their overall maximalist goals haven't changed. And so having possession of one of the largest nuclear power plants in Europe, and certainly in Ukraine, is in keeping with this broader desire by Putin to exert control over Ukraine and over Ukraine's sovereignty.
Thank you. Let's go to Hiba Nasser. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks, Sam. Thanks, John. I want to ask about Iran. First, regarding the IAEA investigation, we saw the reports, media reports, the last 2 days. Is the US putting a condition that Iran must respond to all the questions before signing a deal? And my second question is do you have indication whether the Russians started using the Iranian drones on the battlefield in Ukraine?
So on the first one, and I got this question last week, so pardon me for being not just sounding, but actually being redundant. Our position remains absolutely clear. And we've communicated this repeatedly, both in public and in private, to Iran. Iran needs to answer the IAEA's questions. That's the only way to address these issues. Our position is not going to change, regardless of where we express that, whether it's in the text of an understanding on mutual return to the JCPOA or elsewhere. There should not be any conditionality between re-implementation of the nuclear deal and investigations that are related to Iran's legal obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty and its comprehensive safeguards agreement. Iran itself has been public in saying that it will not complete the main steps needed for mutual return to implementation of the deal until outstanding safeguards issues are resolved. Now, obviously, and I said this the other day, it's preferable to be able to return to full implementation of the nuclear deal without having any open safeguards issues. The power to achieve that is fully in Iran's hands. So I'll leave it there. And you asked about I think you're asking about whether we've seen Russia using
yes.
Iranian drones. Is that right?
Yes. Did they start using the Iranian drones on the battlefield in Ukraine?
Yeah, we're watching this real closely. I don't have an update for you right now, but we're watching this very, very closely. I tell you what, we haven't seen any indication that there's any lack of effort or desire by the Russians to procure Iranian drones for the purpose of using them in Ukraine. We've seen nothing that gives us a sense of comfort that procurement and delivery is still looming, is still in the offing. I think I'd leave it at that for right now.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Amer Matani. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, John. Hi, Saloni. I had a question just on to what extent is the White House involved in the intelligence assessment of classified documents that Director Haynes ordered over the weekend? And did the president or anyone from NSC or the White House ask Director Haynes to conduct such an assessment? And then just more broadly, does the president believe such an assessment is appropriate and needed?
So there's a lot there. The White House is not involved in the damage assessment that the DNI is going to be conducting over these documents. This is within Director Haynes' purview, and I would refer you to her office to speak to that. But there's no White House involvement in that. It is an appropriate action for the director and the intelligence community to undertake. Again, I'd let them speak to the details of this.
All right, let's go to Dave Lawler. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Great, thanks so much. I want to ask about the Kherson counteroffensive, the reports coming out this morning, some Ukrainian officials have commented, I believe. Can you give us any update on what you're seeing there? And since you mentioned in the last briefing the idea that some of these, or there could be an announcement about referendums potentially, do you think there's any interplay in the timing between launching the offensive and the potential that Russia could start moving toward annexation for some of these territories? Thanks.
So we've certainly seen the comments by Ukrainian officials that they have begun their counter-offensive, particularly now in the south, around Kherson. I want to be careful not to speak to Ukrainian operations. Certainly, Ukrainian future operations. We don't even talk about our own future operations. So I would honestly refer you to the Ukrainian armed forces to speak to their military ops and their intentions. So again, we noted the comments that they've made, acknowledging that they've started. I think there's a couple of points though that I think are worth making. One is that there has been efforts throughout the 6 months of this war where Ukraine has gone on the offense. Now, I recognize that what we're talking about here is the potential for a major counteroffensive, which is different than going on the offense in a more localized way. But the idea of going on the offense is not new to the Ukrainians, and they have been taking the fight to the Russians inside their country. In fact, with some of the assistance that they've gotten from U.S. weapons as well as others, such as HIMARS, they've been actually able to strike behind Russian lines and put the Russians more on the defense. We saw that in the first couple of months, around, say, in the city of, actually in Kyiv and Kharkiv, where all the Russians dug in and took in defensive positions because the Ukrainians were going on the attack. We saw that down south in towns along the line of contact to the north of Melitopol, where the Russians just literally were digging in defensive positions because the Ukrainians were going on the offense. So it's not a new development for them to do this. Again, I'll let them speak to the size and scale and scope of their operations, and I wouldn't want to step on that. I also think another point worth making here is that regardless of the size, scale, and scope of this counteroffensive that they've talked about today, they have already had an impact on Russian military capabilities because the Russians have had to pull resources from the east simply because of reports that the Ukrainians might be going more on the offense in the south. And so they've had to deplete certain units and from certain areas in the east and in the Donbass to respond to what they clearly believed was a looming threat of a counteroffensive. So again, without speaking to what's going on the ground operationally, from a strategic perspective, it's already had an effect on Russian military capability inside Ukraine. It's also worth noting, and this isn't really related to your question, but I think it's worth noting that Russia continues to have manpower problems, and they continue to try to expand not only the body of people that they're recruiting inside Russia, but in trying to entice the further service of some of their conscripts and even contract soldiers beyond their time frames, because they are experiencing manpower challenges that are not made any easier by the way they've had to respond to reports of a potential counteroffensive by the Ukrainians.
Let's go to Aurelia from AFP. You should be able to unmute yourself. Aurelia, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for taking my question. My question is about EU energy situation. We're hearing a bunch of European leaders sounding the alarm about the upcoming winter. The EU is going to hold emergency energy talks next week. And so I was wondering, how concerned is the White House about this? And is there more the United States can do? And maybe, you know, on a broader scale, do you fear that this could undermine the popular and political support for Ukraine in Europe?
Well, each European nation really has to speak for themselves with respect to whatever effect an energy shortages in the fall and winter might have on their support for Ukraine. All I can tell you is that what we see from a diplomatic perspective, what we see on the economic front, and frankly, what we see on the security assistance front is an impressive and absolutely unchanged sense of resolve and unity over supporting Ukraine. But every nation is going to have to speak for that themselves. I mean, yes, we're concerned about the manner in which Mr. Putin has weaponized energy, and yes, we're concerned about potential energy shortages in Europe as the winter approaches. That's why the president stood up a task force to try to improve and expand sources of energy for the European continent, and why we continue to work with distributors and energy companies around the world to try to alleviate whatever shortages might be in place or might be coming going forward. So this is something we're going to stay focused on as the fall turns to winter, and we'll be latched up with allies and partners throughout to try to do what we can to alleviate any shortages coming through. But again, in terms of unity and resolve, we've just seen nothing but determination to continue to support Ukraine. So I think everybody understands that what the stakes are here.
Thank you. Let's go to Franco or Jonas. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks so much, Saloni. Thanks so much, John. I just wanted to ask, the president released a statement kind of reflecting on the Abbey Gate attack and the lives of the 13 youth service members, as well as all the Afghans who died in that attack. I did want to know, would there be any other additional type of commemoration for the anniversary of the withdrawal from Afghanistan? Will the president be speaking publicly, reflecting on this? And second, I wanted to ask about the Iran nuclear deal. There's been some reports on a draft, reports on details of a draft deal, including 165-day implementation over 4 rounds, a release of prisoners from Iran, and initial easing of sanctions on the first round. Can you confirm any of those details of the draft?
No, I cannot. And I think you can understand we're not going to negotiate this thing in public. We gave the EU our response last week. It's now with the EU, and I'm sure with Iran as well to review. In fact, I think Iran has said they're looking at the response. So we're going to leave it there. I just don't think it's helpful for us to negotiate the details of this thing in public. The president believes that a return to a full implementation of the JCPOA is not only in our best national security interest, but the interest of our allies and partners. Quite frankly, it's in the interest of the region. That no problem in the Middle East gets easier to solve with nuclear armed Iran, and so we're going to keep working towards that outcome. Shoot, I forgot your other question.
The other one was on Afghanistan, whether
on the schedule. I don't have anything to speak to with respect to the president's schedule today, but certainly if there's any changes to that, we'll let you know.
Great. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks everyone for joining us, but I think I'm going to turn it back over to Kirby.
Yeah, listen, I wanted to just say I'm sorry again that we started late. The morning got away from me, but I really appreciate everybody hanging in on this thing, and I want to keep doing these. As I said it the first time I did it, if you got any feedback for me, give it to the team, and we'll take it on board. Should they be longer, shorter? Obviously, I'm sure you'd like them to start on time. So would I. But I do want to just apologize for my my tardiness today, and we'll try to get better at that. It's just sometimes my schedule's not my own, and we'll keep doing these if you guys find them helpful.